Hi, you guys. Welcome. To everyone joining, today's session is with Shiva Nalapirmal. And for those of you who are here for the first time, Bate, which translates to a conversation, is the National Institute of Design's platform on which we have conversations on design, environment, the society, and everything else.
Hi Shiva, welcome to Bate.
Hey guys. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much. No.
So Shiva needs no introduction, but I'm still going to introduce him. Shiva Nalapirmal is a graphic designer, site designer, art director, and co-founder of November with Juhi Vishnani. Shiva has worked with Typotech, Bold Monday, Sharp Type, and Lost Type Co-op. In 2017, he became the first graphic designer to be included in the Forbes India 30 Under 30 list. At 24, he became the youngest Indian recipient of the Society of Typographic Aficionados Catalyst Award. And so Shiva has been dubbed by Forbes as the man trying to leave an Indian imprint on typeface design. And Shiva, we are very, very honored to have you at Bate.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, how are you? How have you been doing this lockdown?
I'm good. So November just finished 2 years this month, actually. So we've had a very fruitful and a successful 2 years, I would say, both culturally and creatively and monetarily. So we're very happy about that, and we're constantly kind of moving forward. So I'm just looking forward to the next round.
That's amazing.
Super. Can you repeat the question?
So as a kid, you were very excited about film posters and comics, and we know that you loved Tintin a lot. So tell us something more about your childhood.
Tintin, I would trace everything back to Tintin. My parents were huge fans of the comics, and they had all the comic books when they were kids. So what I was saying was, so as I grew older, I started noticing more and more things that I like in Tintin. And finally, when I was in college, I discovered all of the research and the political, cultural things that went behind writing each of the stories and the relevance, and how Tintin defies time, right? Tintin was started in the 40s and 50s and continued till, I think, 1967. And you can't really see that time for some reason in the comics. It's as relevant now as it was before. I have no idea how he's done that, because the times are completely as different as possible in terms of technology, in terms of fashion, in terms of architecture, anything that you see in the comics, but it seems as relevant and fun even now. So that was something that remained with me. And that was something that I wanted to do in my own work, to create things that defy time in that way.
Right. You wanted to do animation initially, right?
Yeah. So animation was the plan. Like, I wanted to make comics and I wanted to make animation, right? And usually people who make comics are interested in animation and back and forth. And that's basically what I wanted to do. And that was the idea with which I applied to design school, because I learned that you learn animation in design school. So I applied to an ID and DJ and stuff. And so I still had the plan of animation till about my second year, right? My first year, I discovered typography and graphic design, and I fell in love with it. But I was still hanging on to the aspect of I wanted to be an illustrator. I wanted to make films. So in my second year, we had a class, basic animation with Web of Kumarish, who I'm sure all of you guys are familiar with.
Yes,
and he was an amazing teacher. And we had to do this initial assignment called, I'm not sure what it's called now, Anticipation or something like that. It's something in which you have to animate a person catching a ball or like doing a movement. So I was extremely dedicated, because I'm sure anyone who went to design school can relate. Like, if you go to design school with an idea that you want to do something, then the class that pertains to that would be the most important thing for you, right? You look forward to it. And so basic animation for me was like that thing. So I was like, waited a whole year, my entire foundation year, just to do that course. And I was like really, really, really excited. And then I did that assignment and I drew hundreds and hundreds of drawings. And I wanted to make it more tougher for myself because I'm an idiot. And then I made the drawing really complicated. He's wearing clothes, the character's wearing a leather jacket with chains on it, and all of those things animate when he moves and blah,
So
blah,
not
blah,
just
blah,
stick
blah.
figures. Okay.
Yeah, not just stick figure. Because we were supposed to do a stick figure, but I was an asshole. So then I did all these things, and then I drew hundreds of drawings. Of course, anybody can relate to that. And then scanning those drawings and putting them on Monkey Jam. And then Weber was there, and I played it, and it played for, I think, 3 seconds or 4 seconds or something. And then that's when I realized, no, this is not for me. Because the rewards are not as good as the labor. I think that's a very stupid way of saying it. If you're really passionate about animation, that is a litmus test, right? And for me, that litmus test was a fail. So, but weirdly enough, I always say that I don't have patience to be an animator, but I do have patience for type design. So it's weird. You just need to know what you have patience for. And for me, I just figured it out later.
So maybe it was not the patience, maybe it was the interest.
I guess, yeah, anything. I still
Yeah.
love animation. I still watch animation films. And, it's very much a part of me, but it's just something that I don't do. And that, I think, is one of the things that I've learned overall, is that you can't force yourself to do something just because you like the end result. Like, I have great admiration for programmers, and I try to learn to code, and I just can't. And I'm like, my brain doesn't work that way, and I'm good with it. So I work with animators, I work with programmers. And that's the great thing about being in this field, that you can work with the best, of any field that you're interested in. So,
Right. Tell us something about Structor and Adrian Grid. Those were early typefaces, like your first experiments with type?
I can't believe somebody actually remembers this. You must have gone through the depths of the internet to find that. So I designed those in my third year in college. They're very silly typefaces, to be honest. Like, your first fonts are always in Illustrator, and they're always grid based. You make an entire alphabet using the simplest forms and repeating those forms. So, can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yeah, I can. Yeah,
So,
you're audible.
both the typefaces are based on a grid, and both use the least number of parts ever. Like, I think Structure uses just 1/4 of a circle, and then just flipping that to make an O, flipping that to make a D, and so on and so forth. So it was really nothing. It was just A to Z, 1 to 9, 1 to 0. And luckily, when I put it up on Instagram, like, the thing is, I was at the time very much more interested in what I could do with the fonts than making the fonts. So I made all these posters and graphics and this and that. And that was the Behance era. This is pre-Instagram, right? So Behance was like just starting up, and we were like, for the first time, we could put up our work on the internet today and everybody could see it tomorrow. And so we were doing that. And one guy from Spain contacted me and said, if you want it to be a font, then I can publish it. And I was in third year. I was 18, 19 years old, and I was obviously very, very excited. And it happened. This guy named Juan, very nice guy. He's a graffiti artist and a font designer. He had a small foundry of display fonts, and he put it on Font Lab, made it a font, released it, and gave me commission. So I was ecstatic at that time. But that gave me a first intro into working outside of your own context. Like, that project really taught me that I can actually be part of the internet, because till then I was only consuming from the internet, if you know what I mean. I've never really cross-culturally, worked with anybody. So I was still a student. Again, I've not even barely done my internship at that time. So it was just pure luck, to be honest, that someone found it and offered to do this. So I'm very grateful to those opportunities.
Okay. We have a question about your experience at MICA. So tell us something about your life-changing class with Tal Lemon.
So everything happened, like, in my life. I've figured that everything happens at the right time, and progressively, like, one thing happens after the next. That I've been very lucky for that. So I've just done this structure, and that was basically just a small typographic experiment on Illustrator, right? And this guy basically opened my mind as to how it can be a font and you can type in your own thing. And I was just beginning to understand that. And when I went to my master's in MICA, there was in the first semester, there was a graduate typeface design class. So I thought, yeah, I mean, I'm interested in it. So I should look into it. And at this point, I wasn't even that much into type design. You know, I don't even know anything that goes behind it. I've never designed a glyph properly, you know. Making a letter on Illustrator doesn't count. Like, it's about doing it on the font editor. So, and Tal Lemming so happened, like, of course, I'd heard of Tal Lemming. He's a very famous type designer. He was teaching, and I don't know what to say. It was just a great class, and he basically took a perfect class. You know, like a class that you wish would be, you know, that the structure would be the same for all classes, because he taught us both the technical stuff. He taught us the commercial stuff. He taught us the conceptual stuff. So he was like, he not only taught us how to design fonts, he also taught us how to look at fonts in a conceptual way, that what their purpose is, because otherwise you're just making letters, right? But what's the point? Like, what is it used for? And he taught us how to sell fonts as well, like the industry. He told us about, you know, the various different methods and models. And most importantly, he taught us that type design is its own field. And it's very, actually, apart from being dependent on graphic design for, you know, selling a product to that industry, the two industries are very, very, very different. They barely kind of cross each other, you know, and that's quite a revelatory thing that you understand when you design and get into the typeface design world as such. So that's why I think that was a very influential class, because it was a whole, like a full rounded experience and not just technical knowledge of software or just conceptual knowledge. It was like a whole thing.
Speaking of conceptual knowledge, it's amazing how you've made like entire typefaces out of just pure concept. And that was something I didn't know was possible before, like before I saw your work. So can you give us a sneak peek of what went behind designing Orwellian? Because that was something
Orwellian.
Yes.
So again, I look at typeface design. So I was never interested in getting into the typeface design industry as a type designer. You know, like I never wanted to start my own foundry or be a full-time type designer. So that kind of freed me from the commercial constraints. Like I don't have to. I mean, I don't know. I never thought of getting a job as a type designer. You know, so that kind of freed me to explore and use the field as an experimental kind of place. So Orwellian, at the time I was reading George Orwell's 1984, and I was looking at surveillance. I was looking at a lot of things like ugliness and the concept of beauty and ugliness in typeface design. And so there's a lot of writing on this by Peter Bilak from a lot of people. So Orwellian, I was interested in designing a typeface that went against the normal models of legibility and readability, and wanted to imbibe in it qualities from a different art form, which is literature, which is 1984, right? So I wanted to see if we can design a typeface, because essentially a typeface is a product. It's a piece of software. So if you look at it, it's just a piece of code that is making something possible, like, which in this case is typing. So in such a technical product, are we able to kind of infuse concepts that are beyond the scope of pure technicality, which is what I was trying to do with that typeface. And the end product is more of a fun, lively typeface. I don't think the end product has a lot to do with the beginning concept, but I was open to something like that, you know, which is the fun part of typeface design, because you can never make a truly conceptual typeface because it is very dependent on its production. For example, you can't, like conceptual art, you can't have a R-Mut like Marcel Duchamp thing in type design. It has to be a file, it has to have glyphs, and it has to be typable. So otherwise it's not a font. So within those constraints, how you play with those conceptual paradigms is what is interesting, for me at least.
Have you seen people use Orwellian or your other typefaces for that matter in different kinds of ways? Because most of these typefaces, like you said, are concept-based, and it might be used for more other things than, you know, what typeface. Yeah.
And that's the fun part about type design, because you can put in whatever idea you want, but you can't really control how it's being used, right? Because when you look at a typeface as a graphic designer, you're looking at it from a completely different point of view. You don't have to give a shit about what the concept of the typeface was or anything. It's all about what you see that typeface doing in your work, which is what makes that kind of that conversation between a type designer and graphic designer very interesting. The first use of my typeface Enemy, which was actually my first published typeface, was for Iron and Wine, this band, which I'd never heard of before. But apparently it's a folk band. But the typeface was this aggressive stencil, which I don't think has anything to do with the music, but it somehow fits really well. So the designer who was designing the concert posters saw the font, saw something in it, and made it work, which was very surprising for me. And then that experience kind of compounds each time. Orwellian, I've seen it used in all kinds of things, in music, for restaurants, which I would have never imagined. I would have never, when I'm making a typeface about, like a surveillance state, I didn't really think about how it could be used for food. So that's again up to the imagination of the user. So that's where typeface design becomes very interesting, because it's a two-way street where there is a concept this way and there's a concept this way, and somewhere they meet, and sometimes they don't. I don't think I've seen my typeface used in the way that I pictured ever, till now at least. So it's always fun.
That's a beautiful thing. During your college, you interned at Pentagram after your first year. How was your experience working with Abbott Miller?
Okay, so everybody asked me this question because it's Pentagram and everything, but it wasn't like I would go into office and be like, just design some big corporate manual or whatever. I was a very small cog in a very, very large machine. We were working on this university branding, and I was just making display systems. Like there was a bunch of screens at a waiting area, and I was in charge of designing the graphics that go on those screens. So it was about looking at photographs, looking at videos, and so it was very not graphic design, to be honest. I was working with video, but it was the job at hand. But again, I was an intern. Like, I was doing the smallest possible thing. But what was interesting was I could observe the processes. I could observe how things are made in Pentagram, and I had access to the office and their archives. So Abbott's entire history of work was there in that office, and I could go through anything, and I had full freedom to look at everything, read everything. So that was really the learning for me. And I think it was a great experience. So Pentagram has many different partners. I think 21 partners now. And each partner basically has their own design studio, and they have their own clients and their own kind of styles and whatever. So Abbott Miller is my favorite designer in that group, and because his work is very on the more cultural side and more art side, much more conceptual work, and not so much corporate, not so much commercial. So I was able to observe Pentagram from that point of view. So I wouldn't really know how it goes down, like, say, for Michael Beirut or any other partner. But I think I was lucky to get the internship with the partner who I most identify with as a designer. So it was a great learning.
That's amazing. Now I'm going to steer you towards the part that I am most excited about. After you came back to India, in most of your interviews, you have stressed about, the Indianness of design.
Right?
Like embracing our plurality, understanding our identity, that's truly Indian. And apart from what's taught to us in design schools, which is more of the Western theory. So what is your take on that? I want the audience to know what you think about all of that.
So here's the thing. When I talk about this, I get people understand what I'm saying, but also people, it's easy to interpret if I say, like, design education has been completely westernized and we should, look at our plurality and our Indianness. It's very easy to kind of interpret that in a very nationalistic sense, which is completely away from what I mean. Because right now there's a lot of talk about Indianness, a lot of talk about tradition and all of that, which is from a very kind of right-wing point of view, which I don't agree with at all, which is kind of empty promises of just being anti, we don't know what India culture is, but we know what it isn't, that whole thing where you point at things and say, this is not Indian culture, this is not Indian, this is that. So I don't really agree with any of that. I think context is really what I keep talking about. For example, when design started in India with the formation of NID, I mean design education in the formal sense. I don't mean design, with NID, they had faculty sent to study all over the world, like graphic designers were sent to Switzerland and so on and so forth, right? So they brought in an import of modernism, which my point is that the modernism that we interpreted in graphic design is a very Swiss kind of modernism, right? But the modernism that was happening in India at the time was actually Shantiniketan and the Bombay School, what Tayyab Mehta, artists were kind of interpreting as an Indian experience, which I think should have actually been the source of our graphic design sensibilities. And I'm talking purely about graphic design. I'm not talking about industrial design. I'm not talking about furniture, etc. I'm talking purely graphic visual design. I think the real source code of our visual language and visual sensibilities and strategies should have been in the modern art movements of India in the post-independent era. But instead it was sourced from, Swiss modernism, which is the internationalist style of corporate design, So, and I think that continues till today, where all our basics are those Bauhaus basics, where we, for some reason, cut out letters and like paste them on paper and look at the black and white. I'll be honest with you. I think that's just done in a rote way. I don't think I learned anything from that assignment. I learned much more from our living with people, which I think you guys call environmental exposure, as a graphic designer. You know what I mean? And I think context changes graphic design from place to place. That's why Japanese design looks a certain way, or I don't mean looks a certain way. It kind of Japanese design gets formulated in a certain way that leads to its conception. Same thing with Swiss design, same thing with Germans, same thing with British graphic design. So if you look at graphic design within subcultures, like for example, Peter Saville, who's I would say my most favorite graphic designer. He designed record covers in the 70s for post-punk and like that whole movement. And that kind of branches outside of the dominant British graphic design that was going on, right? To cater to this very specific subculture. So in that sense, if you look at punk graphic design, if you look at, ska and all these things, they're all kind of diversions because they're all contextual. Like graphic designers are part of a scene where there is music, there's photography, there's film, and all of them kind of relate with each other. And, there is a sensibility that is original, that is kind of rooted, that is that comes from within, that you're reacting to your stimuli that is around you. And I think that is what en masse is missing in India. In the formally educated graphic design movement, but if you look at our vintage magazines, like even from the 80s and 90s, pre-digital magazines, pre-digital.
Air India.
Sorry?
Like Air India.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
Like
Maharaja post. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like a lot of the graphic design that Satyajit Ray did for his book covers and things like that, that he did without any formal education, but he was just reacting in a very artistic way to a design problem, right? He knows exactly where he's an artist and where he's a graphic designer because he's solving a problem or he's creating a commercial work that has to sell a book, right? So in that sense, those become much more Indian graphic design, in my opinion, than say like a very corporate design using Helvetica and using whatever. I don't think we even question why we use Helvetica, So I think there is a great gap between the design educated designers and non-design educated designers. And I find a lot of the great design work in India happens from outside. From the artists. Like MF Hussein's graphic design is great. Graphic design done by KG Subramanian, the logos that he's done and stuff are fantastic. They defy all these rules that we learn in design school. So I think it takes a lot of unlearning. So you do design education, like I've done design education and then I've had to unlearn everything. And I think that's a fun process. But that's what I mean when I say that, Indian design needs to be more plural, needs to be more contextually Indian. So in that sense, there is not one Indian, right? Like there's so many subcultures in India. There's the Tamil culture. There's even within Tamil culture, there's so many different cultures. Caste comes into play in these because as a culture, we're all little pockets of kind of isolation, right? As a culture, we've never mingled with even each other. So how does graphic design make sense in that? So I think importing that Western import without questioning is my problem. I think if we were to import anything, I mean, we're in a globalized world. Of course, I'm not saying that we will be this little island and rebel against everybody. But my point is that if we are importing something, then we need to know why and how it can be contextualized. For example, even sneaker culture, it's obviously a culture that is an export of hip hop. That is black culture in the 1980s, but now you have sneaker culture in Delhi and in Japan and in Tokyo. So how is it contextualized in all these places? So I think I wavered a bit, but you get what I mean.
No, you haven't. So, at most of your work, it has like all of your values come together in most of your work. The kind of work that you do, the work that you did for Katyakari. So here's a question from my professor, Tanishka Kachru. It's how do you see your agency as a designer to make change?
Agency, that's a very interesting topic actually, because graphic designers as such, we would think that we have less agency because we work for a specific client with their constraints. And so we're trying to basically work within those does well for that brand or whatever. And I think that commercialization of design is an interesting topic because design essentially was a socialist output. Because Bauhaus, the essence of Bauhaus is socialism. And it was kind of co-opted in that way by global capitalism, and now we're where we are with our branding and working with brands. So agency as such, I think we have a kind of responsibility to subvert our own processes and our own kind of briefs, in a sense, because if we're working, say, for a brand, and we're creating, say, campaigns or identities or whatever, we need to be also aware of that works. We need to be aware of the magnitude of what we're doing. For example, if you look at Amul, that girl, whoever designed it, I don't know who it was, but whoever designed that girl and that whole campaign of responding to the current times or whatever, that would have started as a very simple idea, but now it's become a cultural kind of like a thing that everybody in India knows, and it's touched all our lives, and we all know that one ad that we all love from Amul and so on, and that I think is really the effect of a graphic designer's decisions. And I'm sure even when we're working with tiny brands and small little things, we need to understand that our work is going to influence somebody at some point. You know what I mean? If we're designing children's books, then we're probably designing somebody's first memory ever. And that's a very profound thing if you think about it. And I think agency in our kind of globalized, commercialized, capitalist context, agency comes in that, in the effect of the work that we create. Of course, the company who we create it for, like the organizations or whoever, be it a museum or a big corporate brand, will have a certain effect on culture, on life and on their customers. And I think our agency comes with how we kind of navigate that to create a very positive and not a harmful effect. Like a good case study that I think all students should read about is the Enron case, where Paul Rand designed the logo for Enron, this big company, and his logo is that E. It's very famous. I'm sure you've all seen it. And Enron became embroiled in the biggest corporate scam in the history of the United States. So then that logo, when you look at the logo before the scam, you think of stability, you think of, it's like a trustworthy brand. And you look at that logo somewhere and you'll be like, okay, I trust this brand. But after that scam, it became the exact opposite. That logo meant evil, right? So that E became, instead of Enron, became Evil Corp. And then that it became a cultural meme where people started using it as a, when someone scams, it's like, you know, how Watergate, like Colgate or whatever, that gate is added. So that logo is added to scams. And that's Paul Rand's work. You know, I don't think he envisioned it to be used in a meme-like format. So I think that's where our agency really comes, like our effect on the world, both by our admission and by, you know, how it kind of the life it takes on by itself.
Right. So something like the politics of design, like design either subverts the status quo or maintains it. So when you take up your projects, do you look at the politics of it? Do you see that before you take on work? Like, is there
yes, I would definitely say that. Of course, there are some ethical boundaries that we will never cross. There are, you know, industries that we would never work with. But at the same time, we are also very conscious that we do live in this world, and we do work in graphic design. And our solution is not to leave this field and kind of because of whatever. We believe that we need to give back as much as we take. So we do have a lot of kind of criteria. We've said no to a lot of projects that we are uncomfortable with, where we don't ourselves subscribe to the product, or we will never kind of recommend to somebody. So we don't want to make that a thing. So sometimes it's been very hard to say no to certain projects because they were quite big. But at the same time, we have worked with a lot of projects from the corporate world where we're more kind of comfortable with it. So I can't, like, you know, we have to be realistic. That's something that we've had to come to terms with, idealism versus realism. But at the same time, like you said, we do have some criteria, and that we follow that criteria very strictly.
That's amazing.
But again, we do believe that brands can do good things. Like, for example, Amul, for example, has done great things. Tata has done great things. But at the same time, there is no single organization that is perfect. Even if you look at the best museums, they have dirt under them. So it's up to us designers. When we work with them, we set guidelines and make sure that our work kind of helps growing that organization to something better. I think that should be the ideal, you know. And if, of course, it also depends on who's running it, and, you know, all of those things.
You run a very plural practice with Juhi Vishnani at November Studio. So tell us about the conception of the studio. How did November come to be?
So Juhi and I, so we're married. So we've been together since 2010. Since college, we've been dating since we were 18. And I guess in our second year, we decided that we wanted to have a studio, you know, later. We've always been kind of more entrepreneurial, both of us. We've always been interested in doing things by ourselves and creating things. And so we've always had the vision of starting a studio. The only question was when. So I think after college, we both went to our respective masters. And then when we came back, I started freelancing, and I started working with various different brands, and more on the cultural side, working with music, working with art, working with brands I wanted, like Red Bull Music and Snapchat, and like more cultural stuff. And Juhi came back and started working at more corporate work. So she designed, she was part of the project. They designed the logo for the National Stock Exchange, Axis Bank. So she's done these big corporate projects, and I've done these really boutique, kind of creatively enlightening projects. So after, in 2018, we decided that we are kind of experienced enough, and we are kind of confident enough to do our own thing. So we started in November. Yeah, that's basically how it was, just about timing. And we're always very cautious people. And Juhi, her greatest strength is that she's the exact opposite of a procrastinator. I'm a procrastinator, right? I will always put things off, and I'm always kind of in my own world. But for Juhi, if she wants to get something done, it will be done immediately. So I think that balance that both of these kind of personalities create is really what November is all about.
That's amazing. So it's been 2 years now since November started.
Yes. And our little experiment worked. Like, the thing is, we didn't want it to be like any of the studios that we worked at. In the sense, not in a bad way, in the sense that we wanted to do our own thing, and we wanted to discover what we were. And so we had certain criteria that, and certain completely open criteria. Like, so we were interested in various things as individuals. We're very interested in fashion. We're very interested in cinema. We're very interested in all of these other things other than graphic design. And we thought, as graphic designers, we want to work with all these different people. So we worked in the fashion world. We worked with two of the major brands in India, Bodice and Eka, and we're very happy with both the projects. We were able to design typefaces for Bodice and do a whole campaign. We got that experience of art direction, working with photographers, doing a photo shoot and things like that on one end. And then another end, we work with startups like Setu and financial tech startups. It can't get drier and more tech than that. So on both extremes, we were able to work, and in between, we did a bunch of projects and various things. We've designed title credits for a film, magazine covers, and all kinds of things. So I think that plurality, not just in our process, but also in the projects that we work with, that was that was very important to us. So I think, the 2 years has been very interesting because each project cannot be more different from the other.
November was recently inducted into the coveted Alliance Graphique International.
Yeah.
How did you feel about that?
Well, it was a very proud
do you
moment.
think it's one step closer to putting Indian graphic design on the map?
I think
Like
Indian
India
graphic
on the
design
map of
is.
graphic design.
I think Indian graphic design is already on the map. I don't think we can take any credit. I think a lot of the great work was done by design studios before us. People like CoDesign, of course. We owe a lot to all the studios that created the space for new design studios to come. Like, for example, I'm sure these guys had to really haggle with clients and explain to them the importance of graphic design. And before them in the 90s, people like design studios would have had to explain why you need a design studio and not an ad agency, and why probably you need both, and they both do different things. So all of those fights and wars and battles have already been won for us to kind of come in and kind of just do the fun stuff. So I think I can't, so I can't really take credit for any of that. And I think, I think Trapeze, Ray and Keshavan, CoDesign, of course, is much newer. And all these guys have set a kind of foundation for newer studios to come up. So I think we will probably set another foundation for the studio from the next 10 years. And I don't know what that might be. But yeah.
Awesome.
Oh,
Now
Mahar is
coming
here.
to Mahar is here, yeah. That's what I saw. Tell us something about the November library. Like, you guys are working relentlessly to identify the identities of designers who've done a lot of the amazing titles, posters.
So I don't know
but don't
relentlessly, but we were working quite hard on it before the pandemic. So we discovered a few. I mean, see, the thing with India is everything exists. We just have to find it. So there are amazing libraries and amazing collections. Like just before the pandemic, I discovered a bookshop near my house that's always been near my house for the past 20 years. And I never knew it existed. And it's an antiquarian bookstore where the guy has books from the 50s. I bought Mahatma Gandhi's Young India magazine, an original print from there for 200 rupees. So there are things in there that should be in a museum. That's been there in Chennai. For those from Chennai who are logging in, it's a bookstore called Rare Books. It's right next to Bill Roth Hospital. You should definitely go there. So all of these resources exist. We just have to kind of find them. And I think we were very inspired by several projects that came before. One is Dekho by CoDesign. And there are several other kind of internet-based, there's an internet archive collection of Indian publications from the British Museum. So a bunch of these things. And we were always interested in, again, documenting Indian graphic design from a kind of pedagogical point of view. Very formal, like looking at graphic design as such and looking at the context in which the graphic design was created. And we were very interested, inspired by the work of the Dalit Panther Archive as well, who there are two girls who document and kind of collect the magazines and the printed matter created by the Dalit Panthers in the 70s and 80s by poets like Namdev Dasal and some great people. So, and a lot of that work, obviously, if you're designing, I mean, if you're publishing a magazine, you need a graphic designer, you need a layout artist, you need a cover artist, you need illustrators. And they've documented all of this, and they're such amazing work. Of course, very politically charged, and that's what makes them really good. And so we were inspired by that project very much, and we thought we'll do a more generalized version where we look at. But one thing that we did not want to do was we did not want to get into the ephemera. We didn't want to talk about kitsch. We didn't want to talk about lorry art and graffiti and political signage and things like that. We want to talk about graphic design, like where there is a person sitting and making something for somebody else for a very specific, like client designer relationship, like magazine design, like branding, like things like that. And then we collected a lot of things. And then the pandemic hit, and really we've been stuck inside, and all these resources just closed up. So 3 of the libraries that we were supposed to go to in March were shut, and we were supposed to make a film as well on a handwritten newspaper in Chennai, and that also kind of got shelved. So right now, again, as anybody who's followed November Library would know, that it's been paused for a few months. We are planning to kind of get back to it properly. But now we're trying to see how we can recontextualize it, maybe kind of open the kind of horizons a little more. Because a lot of the questions that we get asked all the time by younger designers or friends is to recommend things, to look at graphic design from a different point of view. So we don't want to kind of constrain November Library to just documenting old Indian graphic design. So maybe we'll talk about a lot more things that kind of... So I don't know. Again, we're quite confused in that way about the future of November Library, but it's definitely not going to stop. It's going to happen. But it's just that we've just been slowed down by the pandemic quite a bit.
Okay. We have one question from the audience right now. That is, can you elaborate more on the work you do on your politically charged works? Can you elaborate more on your politically charged work? Will that be called self-expression? And what kind of expression? Like the mode, the medium?
So,
like that.
Our political work, basically we've done both commissioned as well as private, like, self-initiated. One of the first projects that we did that was expressly political was working with Katyapari, who are a social justice theatre group with an Ambedkarite anti-caste point of view. So they talk about the Dalit experience in modern India. They talk about trans, queer experiences. They talk about all these really kind of hard topics about social justice, about manual scavenging, about the caste aspects in normal society. And they do these productions in, they made a production about trans rights to a full village audience. They're the first collective to make an entire production completely written, directed, and acted by a trans-only cast, basically. Sorry. So they're quite an avant-garde group, and they work primarily in Tamil and Malayalam. And actually, it was an accident. Like the founder, as in the director, he emailed me asking to work on their posters, and he was actually trying to email a different Shiva, who is another graphic designer apparently. There's another graphic designer named Shiva in Tamil Nadu who works on film posters, and he was trying to contact that guy and got my email by mistake and emailed me. And so of course I'd heard of them, and I did some more reading, and they're like this really revolutionary group. And so I thought, that we should work with them, and we don't. So I had a discussion with them, and they were completely open. Like, they were like, "You're the graphic designer, you do what you want. Just see our productions and make the poster." And I was like very happy with that. It's very rare. Like, for example, I've had 2 experiences with artists. We worked with a lot of artists. Like, we worked with fashion designers, we worked with filmmakers, we worked with these guys, and 2 kind of artists who work with other artists, right? Like, if I consider myself an artist and another artist I'm designing for, either is extremely controlling in the sense they know exactly what they want and they want that, or they are completely free. Like, these guys were the second. They were like, "You're the artist, you do it." So the first play was this play called Manjal, which is about manual scavenging in urban societies. and about the caste aspect of it. And it kind of spans this amazing range of topics within a 2 hour production. And it's hard hitting stuff, right? And so we designed the poster for that first. And we designed a bunch of posters. Like we said that we'll design new posters each time you make the production. So we designed a few specific things that will carry forward, like, basic branding where some things are kind of standard and then other things are different. And so we designed that, a bunch of posters for their play, and then more plays came and we designed more posters. And then we designed a identity for an exhibition by the curator Shaunak Mahbubani, who's a great young curator who is working on kind of the front lines of the Indian political experience. And it was called Savdan, which is about where India is going in the next 10 years, right? If we keep on this political track that we are. And that was another interesting exhibition that, as graphic designers, how do we interpret the future of India in this kind of really morbid sense? And then that project led to another project where we designed the identity for the artist movement, Artists Unite, which was the pre-elections movement, like, of solidarity between all the artists. So that was a pan-national movement throughout India. 14,000 people attended the event, and there was huge graphics, and we designed this whole typeface and stuff. So then that kind of got us more in touch with people who we share our kind of beliefs with. And so in that way, we worked on these kind of long-term commercial projects with people. And also, we kind of, as graphic designer, I respond to things in the same way that other artists on Instagram do, to the kind of shifts in the, in the way that things are going on today. So in that sense, I would say it's a combination of both self-expression, as in self, as in me as a designer, what I kind of think about what's going on, and then, my expression of our experience as of now. And also in the way of creating tools for others to kind of use, because that's what posters do, right? A poster can never change the world. Like, we need to know that. Like, as graphic designers, we need to know we need to understand the magnitude of our work and also know the limitations of our work. For example, if say this right-wing Sanghi guy looks at my poster, he's not going to change his mind and become suddenly open-minded, right? Suddenly he's not going to be like, oh, you know what, like, everybody's equal. No way. But the point of a poster is that people can use that poster to kind of pledge solidarity. That poster can encapsulate a movement in a visual way. So those are the things that you kind of grapple with as a graphic designer, that this is the effect that my poster or my work is going to have. So I think those are the 2 points of views. One from self-expression, one as a tool for other people to use.
One quick question.
Yeah.
Is type gendered?
I think, no, absolutely not. Type is not gendered. But a lot of people like to gender typefaces. I've seen a lot of type marketing, or even in graphic design, when you choose a script typeface, people justify it, like in the graphic designer, like, reasons or whatever. They say, oh, it's very feminine and so on. I don't really agree with that. I don't think you can gender typefaces. I think it does a great disservice. So no, the short answer is no. I don't think typefaces are gendered.
Okay. So we have about 5 minutes, and
Sure.
Now I'd like to do like a quick lightning kind of a round.
Sure.
With all your favorites. So I'm going to ask you your favorite, a few things,
Sure.
and then.
Yeah. Do I have to say just one? I usually have a very difficult time with saying one.
You can say 3.
Okay.
Okay. Current favorite typeface.
Current favorite typeface. Nara by Andrei Kratky. It's a great typeface.
Okay. Favorite musician or band.
Favorite musician or band? Right now, I would say Nas, who's a rapper. If in hip hop, I would say Nas, and then in rock music, I would say Sonic Youth. Yeah.
Okay. Favorite graphic designer.
Favorite graphic designer, I would say my favorite graphic designer, Peter Saville is one. Emery Douglas, and Karl Martins.
Okay. Favorite book.
Favorite book of all time? Oh my God. I have I have no idea. I really can't say. It's too much. Okay, very simply, favorite. I would say, like right now, off top of my head, I really like the most recent book that I reread was Moss by Art Spiegelman. It's a book that I love. I've always loved. I love Blankets, another graphic novel. Only graphic novels are coming to my mind suddenly. I love Black Hole. So yeah, 3 favorite graphic novels. There you go.
Okay. Favorite TV show?
Favorite TV show, The Wire, very easily. The Wire is not only my favorite. I would go so far as to say it is the greatest television show ever written, and I'm willing to fight anybody who has another opinion.
Okay. Sharan's asking favorite intern.
Favorite intern, I would have to go with. I would have to go with Sharan because he doesn't have a lot of competition. I must tell you, we've only had one intern, so that's kind of cheating. But he is my favorite intern. He was great.
And this was something my class wanted to know. Do you take interns right now?
Right now, no, we're not looking for interns at the moment, but we will put out a call for internship again. So when we do, we hope to see all of you guys apply.
Awesome. We will. We have about 3 minutes. What's your best advice for designers today?
I would say don't look at Instagram as the only way, for you to. Don't fall into the rut of that, that kind of that myth of productivity that Instagram's like inspires or whatever, that you have this need to always post, otherwise you're not visible. So I think that is a very toxic thing that I've learned in the pandemic because I've not used Instagram that much this whole year at all. Like, I used to use it a lot and I used to post a lot more. But I think one of the things that I've learned in this pandemic is that is a very toxic thing. And I think you should, and as a student, I was very lucky to not have this, that I could spend a lot of time on my own work. And I think that is what I would say, timely advice, that don't look at Instagram as your kind of go-to, for quality and for productivity and all those things.
Okay. I think we have just one last minute, but I don't want the live to just shut off before I thank you for this amazing and beautiful, interesting session that we have today. And I hope everyone could take a lot out of it. So thank you, Shiva.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Coming to Baate.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in.
Yeah. So before it shuts off, if we have one more, if we have time for one more question, that would be, can you tell us some podcasts that aspiring designers must check out?
Podcast? I've actually never heard any podcast. The only podcast I've ever heard is Serial, that 2014 one about Adnan Syed. I would say that is an amazing podcast, but I've never heard, haven't heard podcasts much.
Okay. People want to know where else to find you if not Instagram.
So we are working on our website right now, and it is very, 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 very close to completion. So over there, november.in. We're very, very happy with it. It's an experimental website. So we're hoping that it releases by the end of the year. Hoping. But yeah, that's where to find me.
Okay. Thank you, Shiva, for such a beautiful session, and it's been amazing just hosting you. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
And looking forward to a part 2 sometime soon, because we could never really discuss about your typefaces because it was just a very small one.
Sure. I'm always open whenever you want.
Okay. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for coming on live.
Bye.
Bye.